Most of us know this story pretty well. In fact, you probably came here this morning and had the same reaction I had, even though I did this. I did this. Carefully, I will say. But when I walked in the other day, the first thought I had was, what happened? And then realized I did it. You didn't have that luxury, so if this startled any of you, I'm sorry. But most of you have heard this story before. It's in all four Gospels, and it often gets trot out during stewardship campaigns to remind us to be wary of wealth. Some people speculate that this story is a scathing indictment against powerful people with money. Others use it to build a case for why we should keep first things first in the church and not talk about money or, heaven forbid, fundraising. It only creates chaos. But most of the people in the temple that day had no idea why Jesus' tunic was in a bunch when he walked in and started flipping tables as if he had just stepped foot onto an ancient day Wall Street. It was business as usual in the temple that day. Business as usual. So what exactly was Jesus expecting? On high holy days, the temple was always chaotic because Jews traveled to Jerusalem from what seemed like the ends of the earth in celebration of something. For so many of them, this particular holiday was certainly one of their favorites to celebrate, the kind that makes the Yuletide gay and the kids lose sleep. They were celebrating the ancient story of when God showed up that first time in the staff of one very uncertain and dithering man and made a way for them through hell and high water. God had given them their first fresh start of many and made their ancestors into a sacred community. Thousands of Jews, young and old, made pilgrimages every year to the crowded temple in Jerusalem to worship God and to be reminded of this bond that they shared. And for as long as any of them could remember, the everyday business of life happened right alongside the celebration of high holy days in this sacred place. The king had made it politically and economically and religiously expedient to do a kind of one-stop shopping at the temple on these high holy days, and today was no different. As always, people were standing in long lines waiting. Think Black Friday. Waiting for the attention of any one of the priests who were running around like madmen trying to keep up with all the paying customers. Waiting to buy animals that didn't make for good holiday travel, or to exchange theirs with one that wasn't malfunctioning. Waiting anxiously to pay their yearly taxes as they counted the coins in their pockets and wonder whether they would need to take out a line of credit to get by next year. You can almost hear a salesman shouting out, "Get the last goat here!" as people shove their way past one another, trampling small children as they go. A poor man, robbed by a bandit on his way into town, empties out his last dime onto the table as the money changer steals a questioning glance at the chief priest, who reluctantly shakes his head in disapproval as the Roman official behind him nudged him with his arms crossed, and the poor man was turned away. On high holy days, a few people made an awful lot of money, and everybody else spent just about every dime they had. Sounds a little like Black Friday to me. It was business as usual for all involved on the day that Jesus came crashing into town. ancestors gathered together to celebrate so many years ago, they too stood shoulder to shoulder. But instead of being in a long cattle call at the temple, they stood together as families at local altars in their hometowns to offer their very best crops and animals in Thanksgiving. And then they would go home and they would join hands together around a table set with every fixing and mom's finest stoneware to feast for days. And when they looked around the table into the eyes of their loved ones, they were reminded of the joy found in their shared common life together, in the community that God had given them so many years ago. And they found reason to celebrate the God who gave it all to them. But somewhere along the lines, their tables got bigger, families stopped meeting at home, and they relocated sacrifices and communal meals to the bustling city in Jerusalem. There wasn't anything inherently wrong with this. In fact, gathering together as a whole community instead of single family units had the potential to widen their understanding of the common life they all shared. The temple could have been a place that brought people into relationship with one another who otherwise wouldn't have crossed paths. It could have been a place where long-lost loved ones found their way home, where family feuds were mended, where children were given a seat at the table, and the neglected were remembered, just because they were so darn joyful to be celebrating the love of God that had been given to them all. But that's not what happened. Instead, gathering together became just business. For those earning money, it became all about earning money. For those seeking power, it was just another tangible reminder of exactly who had the most. Sacrifices became less of a communal event and more of a bargaining chip. A way for people in high places to gain the economic advantage at the expense of others. And money became the blind spot in everyone's eye. It was the wedge that was driven between priests and money changers, Roman officials, and fellow citizens who were all in a rat race with whomever they could reasonably compete to get more. It was just business. But we all know that there is a burden to things being just business. The burden is that usually everything else stops being so personal. We've all heard the saying, it's not personal, it's just business. It's usually said by those of us attempting to earn something at the expense of other people around us. But what's so deeply ironic about this phrase is that in a world where humans rely on and affect one another in our actions, how we do business is always personal to someone. In their temple and in our world, we might be conducting business as usual by trying to earn all we can for ourselves. But if we're not careful, it often comes at the expense of forgetting or even trampling on a few people along the way. As we talked about last week, John Wesley, the founding father of Methodism, talked about 3 simple rules for money, and the first of which is earn all you can. Wesley didn't have a problem with earning money. And frankly, I'm not sure that Jesus did either. Both of them encouraged responsible use of and profiting of money. Think of Jesus' parable of the talents. But Wesley put a caveat on his first rule. Perhaps a bit more diplomatically than Jesus' decision to braid together a whip and knock a few heads together. Wesley believed that we are to earn all we can. But he was channeling Jesus when he stressed that we should not do it at the expense of our own souls or the souls of our neighbors. What are we earning for? Who is being affected Are they being affected positively or negatively? These are the questions that Wesley is calling us to ask ourselves in our earning. In his sermon called The Most Excellent Way, Wesley says that Christians, after using prayer, should apply themselves to the business of their calling. But for what end do you undertake and follow your worldly business? Providing for your needs and family is a good answer as far as it goes. But it doesn't go far enough. A Christian may go abundantly farther. Wesley believed that each of us have gifts and talents that we've been given that can be used in any number of ways in the world. And Wesley believes that we're all called to some business. He also believed that taking care of ourselves and others are reasonable goals. But as Christ followers, Wesley challenged us to go a step further. Taking his cues from Jesus' two major commandments to love God and neighbor, Wesley deduced that we are not islands unto ourselves. As human beings, we are a part of a whole. We are intrinsically connected to the people around us. And so how we act and what we earn and who we become affects them. And so we must prioritize caring for God's people and the world in our earning. Wesley said that the goal of labor is to please God. To do the will of God on earth as angels do in heaven. Is that not a more excellent way? Wesley's question, is that not a more excellent way, is a good one. And I think it's a question Jesus would have asked had he not been so raging mad that day in the temple. The people in the temple, from the tallest to the smallest, had missed the more excellent way. Because gathering at the temple for this high holy day could have been a visible reminder of the invisible bond that God gave them so many years ago. It could have reminded them that their bodies, together in community, were the real temple. The place where God's love and mercy was stored and shared by mouths and hands and feet. They couldn't see that gathering in this temple was about sharing God's love in communion, and it wasn't just business as usual. So they couldn't see that when one body was hurting, it slowly chipped away at the mortar of the entire building. It's no wonder that Jesus, at the end of these verses, likens his own body to the temple, which would be destroyed in just a short time. As individuals, we cannot be faithful to the life Christ calls us to lead if we get caught up in systems where we're so focused on our own earning that we cannot see how it affects the people around us. And as the church, we cannot be faithful to the life Christ calls us to lead in our ministries if we allow money to be the driving concern in whether or not to trust the direction that God is calling us to go. We also cannot be faithful to Christ if we choose to pretend that the way we earn money has no relevance or bearing on our spiritual lives, and then decide never to talk about it. We must take care to earn all we can, as Father Wesley has suggested we should do. But we need to be responsible for our talents and gifts and use them for God's glory. And God's glory looks like hungry mouths fed, and relationships healed, and grace poured out, and lives transformed, and the invisible made visible, and the poor cared for, and the created world cultivated, and a deep harmony between all of God's creatures. So what are we earning for? it just business as usual? Or is there a greater glory in mind? Amen.